निशान साथ है इतने के कुछ शुमार नहीं हमारे दीन का क़िस्सों पे ही मदार नहीं.
Septicemia and multi-organ failure. So he's very, very sick, and the bleeding is our primary problem. In reality, I've seen people like that die, and die very quickly.
ये आया है इस सेकेंडरी स्कूल का, ये टीचर है, शाम को, रात को बल्कि लेट आया है ज़रा, तो इसकी तबीयत को इतनी ठीक नहीं थी. रात को काफ़ी दफ़ा उठा और बड़ा बेचैन था, और सुबह उसके बाद सोया रहा. ये मैं भी ज़रा गया हुआ था काम से, वापस आया हूँ, तो मैंने इसको पूछा कि क्या उसका क्या हाल है. वो कहते हैं सोया हुआ है. तो ऊपर इसके कमरे से आवाज़ आई, कुछ ऐसे लगता है कोई चीज़ गिरी है.
I called my father-in-law and we both went together upstairs to check on Nabeel. He was lying down in his bed.
The curtains were drawn shut, apart from there was a glimmer of light coming which shone on Nabeel, directly on his face, and we all saw how purple he was. He was extremely purple.
तो इसको उठाया, मैंने कहा नबील उठो उठो, जवाब दे, हाँ हाँ करे, लेकिन वो बैठ ही ना सके. तो फिर उसको बिठाएं, लेकिन वो ना बैठ सके, फिर लेट जाए. उस वक्त फिर एम्बुलेंस को बुलाया हमने. सारा उन्होंने उसको देखा, चेक किया. वो भी ज़रा थोड़े से कंसर्न लग रहे थे, और उन्होंने फटाफट इसको एम्बुलेंस में ले गए अस्पताल.
And I saw him on the stretcher in a very, very poorly state, and I saw his skin was all darkened and blackened from the infection. And just by looking at him, I thought, this guy is not going to survive the night.
But never in our thoughts, never in our corner of our minds did we ever think that he was seriously ill. It was just a bit of shock. It was just a bit of shock that he's just seemed to be deteriorating really fast.
सारे वहाँ पे जो डॉक्टर्स वगैरह नर्सेज मुझे कुछ वरीड भी लग रहे थे. वो कहने लगे हमें इसको आईसीयू में लेके जाना पड़ेगा. कुछ देर के बाद उन्होंने बताया कि वो तो बहुत ज़्यादा सीरियस इसको बीमारी है. वहाँ जो कंसल्टेंट थी वो कहने लगी कि हमें नहीं पता कि क्या है, लेकिन इसका जो कंप्लीट सिस्टम है ना, वो इज शटिंग डाउन. आई थिंक वी आर लूजिंग हिम, और ये नहीं बचेगा.
Unbeknown to me that this was a day that we would never ever forget from the rest of our lives. I wasn't thinking about myself, about my son at that moment. I remember it was really, really strange, but all I could think of was, how am I going to explain this to his other siblings? How do I explain to Hannah, who just was here a few minutes ago? How am I going to explain that your husband that you were just talking about just now, he's going to come back in maybe 2-3 days. How am I going to survive without him? These were the things, and I just kept shaking my head. I can't do this. I'm not going to do this. And my daughter said, Ami, you have to, you just have to. I said, no, it's not something, I'm not going to do it. So eventually I did go upstairs, and there was Hannah, and she was putting the baby to sleep, and she had tears in her eyes. She was praying for him, but she had no idea. She had no idea what I was about to say. And I did say, I said, Hannah, he's actually, Nabeel is quite ill. I don't even remember what I said to her, and I don't even think she even understood what I said. I could just see the tears coming down her eyes.
I would find it really hard to visit him in the hospital at the ICU time, because I couldn't see the state he was in, and I could not bear to see him that way.
गालिबन छठे या सातवें दिन इसको ब्लीडिंग शुरू हो गई. उसको फिर वो कहते हैं हम इसको इमरजेंसी में इसको हॉस्पिटल लेके, वहाँ थिएटर लेके जा रहे हैं, और सिर्फ I'm just letting you know, or we don't know whether he will make it or not.
So they had a look at his stomach. Generally, the whole of his stomach just looked very ill, and there was no focal point of bleeding, but just the whole of the inside of the stomach was really easily bleeding, very oozy.
The biggest issue of his survival was at the moment, it was about his internal bleeding. He had to be taken for surgery once, twice, thrice on the same point of his stomach. It kept bleeding and they tried to rectify it the first time. Surgery was done and then it started bleeding again. He went back to surgery again and then they would bring him back, and the third time it bled again, and this time they said we can't even stitch him up.
Two gastric surgeons have said that if they tried to cut out the stomach now, that he would just effectively bleed to death. They said when they touched the stomach, just with a finger, it bled.
इन लोगों ने बहुत मेहनत की थी, नर्सेज ने, डॉक्टर्स ने और सारे कंसल्टेंट्स ने, तो मैं उसका भी मैंने शुक्रिया अदा किया। मैंने कहा कि ठीक है, तुमने जहाँ तक तुम्हारी कोशिश थी, इंसानी कोशिश आप लोगों ने की है, रियली आई एम रियली थैंकफुल टू यू। उसको मैंने कहा कि तुमने अपनी कर ली है, अब आई जस्ट लीव एवरीथिंग अप टू सुप्रीम बीइंग। और फिर उसको मैंने गले भी लगाया, गले मिला उससे। एक दिन फिर ऐसा आया, इन्होंने देखा कि हर रोज़ हर दूसरे दिन ये 2-2, 3-3 यूनिट जो है ना ब्लड डालते जाते थे। तो इसको अब हमें फ़ैसला करना पड़ेगा। हम इसको मज़ीद एंटीबायोटिक नहीं देंगे, हम मज़ीद इसको खून नहीं देंगे। हमने मुत्तफ़िका ये फ़ैसला किया है कि अब इसको हम मज़ीद हम इसको ट्रीट नहीं करेंगे।
They thought now is the time that he's not progressing anymore and there's no point in him living for us to support him.
I was really upset to why they want to do that. I prayed to Allah Mia that they start giving him blood.
We didn't know what would happen from one minute to the next. Everything was so unpredictable.
We had those 2 or 3 consultants who gathered together in a meeting with us to say, in their 35 years of experience, they have never seen anyone who has survived from this stage. So if you think that he's going to walk out from here, you are mistaken and deluded. That, in fact, they use words very similar to these, a little bit harsher.
हर कंसल्टेंट जो अपने वक्त पे वो ये कहता रहा कि ये नहीं बचेगा, अब बस आखिरी वक्त है, अब आखिरी वक्त है।
It was really hard. I didn't want to believe them at all. I then started thinking all sort of things like, how am I going to do this without him? How am I going to say to his daughter that daddy won't come home? It was really hard for me.
When we found out that the doctors were not going to support him by not giving him blood, which was his lifeline at that time, it floored us. It floored us that if he doesn't get the blood and if he's not going to get any other medication as well, naturally it means that there's nothing to help him.
पैलिएटिव की जो नर्सेज हैं वो आनी शुरू हो गई, डॉक्टर्स बिल्कुल जो आखिर में जो मरीज़ को बिल्कुल जो उसको कंफर्टेबल रखते हैं, मॉर्फिन वगैरह देते हैं। उसको मैं नबील को हमेशा ये कहता था कि नबील, ये तो आपको पता है कि ये नहीं है होपफुल, लेकिन तुमने परेशान नहीं होना और तुमने कोई घबराना नहीं है। और हमेशा मैं उसको कहा करता था कि ला ताहज़न इन्नल्लाह माना।
It's very, very difficult, and we do appreciate your faith and we do appreciate your hope, but that won't be enough, unfortunately, I think. If he deteriorates despite our support, then there's nothing we can do about that.
So there was a lot that happened in the 5 to 5.5 months period that I was in hospital, and a lot of that stuff I didn't remember much of, but I can only do my best to give you a glimpse of kind of my perspective of how things unfolded. I, of course, wasn't aware of of all the days and weeks and months that were going on between that time. There's not much I can remember, but there was a lot of kind of dreams, you could say, I had during that time as I was being shifted from one area to another area, from one room to another room. Recall one dream, which I'm not sure of when it happened, but I remember at the time, I was in a room, as I probably was in a hospital bed, pretty much helpless and unable to move. So there was this nurse who you could just see the intention was that she wanted to kill me. It was something as bizarre as that. I knew that this is what her intention was. Every time she would come a bit close to me, or every time she would approach me, she would just get flung in from one direction. There was kind of this invisible force that was dragging her. And this woman had this very confused expression on her face that, what is it that I'm trying to actually harm this person? I'm trying to actually kill this person, and he's just somehow he has this force around him, or that's preventing me from getting even close to him. And she actually did ask me in this dream that I was having. She asked me, how are you doing this? Is it some form of magic you have? And I remember at that moment I just smiled. I asked her to look up. So at the same time I looked up as well. I mean, that was the first time I was looking up as well. And as I looked up, I just saw this amazing, overwhelmingly bright light, and it was just illuminating the entire sky. And I knew instantly in that moment that was God, that was Allah, and He was the one protecting me.
I would like to share a connection I had with God. It was after Fajr Namaz, I was lying down, really upset, crying. And as I can remember, I was talking to Allah Mia, asking if He could hear me. Is He listening to my prayers? When the box of baby wipes fell to the ground with a big thud, I realized I got reassured that it was Allah Mia. He was telling me that He's there, He's listening to me.
फिर आहिस्ता आहिस्ता वो वहाँ से पैलिएटिव से निकाल के उसको हाई डिपेंडेंसी यूनिट में ले आए.
Which was a miracle, and the doctors and nurses were applauding, and we had known for a long time that a lot of the nurses were praying for him.
As the weeks and the months went by, I began to progress very, very slowly. And this was, of course, to the huge astonishment to all the medical staff that were around. I mean, these were the same people who apparently would said, I had less than 1% chance of surviving. There was a time where one of the doctors came to me in the ICU, and I think this is the point where they had given up. They said, look, we can't do anything more.
Huzur would ask me on a regular basis, how is Nabeel? In fact, sometimes more than once a day. And he would want to know what's the update on Nabeel. I would then have to ring in and find out what the situation was. Sometimes I would ring the consultants who were managing Nabeel's care, because Huzur would be more interested in what the specialists were saying. On a regular basis, I would pass it on to Huzur.
एक बात मैं ये बताना चाहता हूँ कि हजूर का दौरा था USA का, साथ ग्वाटेमाला भी सब तशरीफ़ ले गए थे. अक्टूबर में 2018 की बात है. तो उस वक्त तो इसकी हालत बहुत नाजुक थी.
At that time, we felt that he's going to leave us and we're going to be abandoned. What happened was just so incredible. Huzur would keep up to date with Nabeel's reports. His schedule was so busy.
I was under the impression that he would be I was looking at the time frames, you see. So I thought that when I got the report, maybe he wasn't going to be quite ready to see it, or he was probably delivering his speech or something like that. So I delayed. But then I got a message from Huzur, I think it was via the private secretary, to say, what's the update? I had to go and check with the intensive care unit what was the latest, and then send that report off to Huzur immediately.
हजूर की शफ़क़त, उनकी क्या कहना चाहिए, मेरे पास तो अल्फाज नहीं है. मैं सचमुच मैं बयान नहीं कर सकता किस कदर उन्होंने तवज्जो दी है इस लड़के पे.
Throughout this whole time, we're so lucky, we're so fortunate. We've got Huzur, we've got Khalifa Waqt. He was constantly keeping in touch with what's going on.
We would regularly write to Huzur for prayers and guidance, and we would also give sadaqah regularly.
I honestly don't believe that if it wasn't for Huzur, obviously, there's no way I would have been able to withstand what I did at that time. And it wasn't just in the hospital. I mean, this is, my journey continued on. Even when I went back home and was able to understand, I'm actually at home, I'm alive and I'm at home.
एक बात मैं ये बताता चलूँ कि जो मेरी अम्मी हैं अमेरिका में, सफ़िया बेगम, अली शेख मुबारक अहमद साहब, वो उनकी दुआएं भी इसमें शामिल हाल रहीं.
इनके एक पोते हैं नबील भट्टी, जो 2 साल पहले शदीद बीमार हो गए थे. उनके लिए इन्होंने बहुत दुआएं की, और अल्लाह ताला ने उन्हें फिर इस बच्चे की शिफा के बारे में बता भी दिया, और अल्लाह ताला ने उसको शिफा भी अता फरमाई. लेकिन बहरहाल अभी भी नबील भट्टी साहब छोटी छोटी इनको बाज़ पेचीदगियाँ हैं उस बीमारी की वजह से. अल्लाह ताला इनको कामिल शिफा भी अता फरमाए, और सफ़िया बेगम साहिबा ने जिनकी दुआएं की हुई हैं वो कबूल फरमाए.
बड़ी दुआ उन्होंने की, तो उस वक्त वो उनकी ज़बान पे जारी हो जाता था बाज़ का, जब बहुत परेशानी इनको होनी तो सलामुन कौलुम मिन रब्बिर रहीम और या नारुकूनी बरदम व सलामा. उनकी उम्र उस वक्त कोई 92 को साल होगी और बहुत रो रो के दुआ करती रही और पहले तो पूछती थी कि क्या है, मुझे बताओ कि क्या, अब क्या हाल है, अब क्या हाल है। बाद में कहने लगी मुझे तसल्ली होगी, अल्लाह ताला ने मुझे तसल्ली दे दी है।
I did ask Hazur at one point. I said, Hazur, is there a reason? Is there some sort of reasoning behind as to why this happened? And all he said was, Allah ki har kaam mein hikmat hoti hai. In other words, in everything Allah does, there's wisdom in it. And that was enough to reassure me quite a lot. And those words still affect me today. And the subject of how the doctors had given up on me did also come up. And to that, Hazur did also say to me, and his words were, Tumne apna to dekh liya. डॉक्टर ने तुम्हें मार दिया था लेकिन खुदा ने कहा कि मैंने नहीं मारना. And again, you see, these were words which it just made me realize, how involved God was in helping me to survive. And it was actually Allah the whole time.
हुजूर की तवज्जो और हुजूर की दुआएं शुरू से शामिल हाल रही हैं नबील की बीमारी में. आईसीयू में जिस वक्त था उस वक्त से लेकर आखिर वक्त तक मुसलसल हजूर के होम्योपैथिक नुस्खा जात हमने इस्तेमाल किए.
Hazur's support was immense. It held us up. Hazur's prayers, was something that gave us great contentment. It gave us hope where there was none. Even today, if I see the video, it's very emotional that he was coming home. It was something that we knew he would, but it was reality, it was fact.
We just felt Allah's promises to us had come true and had manifested itself. It was extremely joyous, extremely humbling.
My daughter was happy to see her father. We were all so excited and couldn't thank Allah Miya enough that he has brought my husband home. My daughter has developed such a great, strong attachment to her father and doesn't want him to go anywhere.
The miracle of Allah Almighty bringing back my brother to life from the dead, it was something that we felt an experience not many people get to see, and we witnessed Allah's true majesty.
100% हुजूर की दुआ, हुजूर की तवज्जो और हुजूर की दवाइयों से अल्लाह ताला ने ये मुर्दा ज़िंदा किया है.
It wasn't just through those 5 or 5.5 months that I was in hospital. I mean, these blessings have carried on, 2.5 years, even now. And I'm receiving these blessings and I'm seeing, the living God's existence every day.
मैं सच कहता हूँ और मैं दिल की गहराइयों से कहता हूँ कि जितनी भी कदर करते हैं, जितना भी हम प्यार करते हैं खलीफा वक्त से, सच मैं कहता हूँ कि हम उतनी इनकी हम कदर नहीं करते जितनी हमें करनी चाहिए, और जितना हमें इनसे प्यार करना चाहिए और जितनी इनकी हमें फरमाबरदारी करनी चाहिए हम नहीं करते और सचमुच नहीं करते.
So this is where I am today. And, with good intentions, a lot of people, feel very sympathetic about my story and the situation that I went through. Of course, that's human nature, they can understand what I went through and they feel a lot of remorse. But I often have, to try and explain to them that actually what I went through wasn't bad, and what I've seen as a result of what I went through is not bad at all. And, if I was given a choice, to kind of rewind the tape and live the life that I was before, or go through all of this ordeal and experience all that I have, I would choose this life every time. And it sounds bizarre, it sounds bizarre, because apparently who in their right mind would want to go through all of this? But the thing is, the blessings that I've received through this time and that I am receiving, and the way that I've actually seen God, or the way that God has manifested himself, I don't think I could have ever experienced that in the life that I had before. You see, because it's not about me at all, it never was. I think a lot of people think this is you, something happened to you, and as in, there must be a reason why God did this to you, and you must have done something and things like that to receive all these blessings. But I have to constantly remind them, and of course myself, that this is actually not about me at all. This is about God. This is about Allah. It's His blessings and it's His work. I was just fortunate enough to be that medium through which He showed His divine manifestation.